The warship's hull groaned as it cut through the vast expanse of space. Inside, the air was cold, sterile, and still. A faint hum echoed through the halls, the only sound to break the silence. In one of the ship's high-tech cells, a human prisoner sat, eyes scanning the sleek walls that seemed to stretch endlessly. His name was Derek, a soldier from Earth who had been taken by the Zyrixians, an alien race known across the galaxy for their brutal conquest of countless worlds. Derek had never expected to find himself in a situation like this. He was no stranger to combat, but he had always fought for survival, never expecting to be captured by another species. He stared out of the transparent walls of his cell, thinking of his crew, his friends, his family. But now, all of that seemed distant. He was alone, with no way to communicate with the outside world. The Zyrixians had a strange way of dealing with prisoners. They didn't torture or kill on a whim, but they observed. They studied. And Derek had become an object of fascination. The Zyrixians had never encountered a species quite like humans, tough, resilient, and unpredictable. But what fascinated them even more was their sheer ability to survive in hostile environments, their ability to adapt. The Zyrixians had no desire to kill Derek. No, they were far more interested in seeing just how far a human could be pushed before they broke. As Derek sat on the cold floor, he couldn't help but wonder what the Zyrixians expected from him. Would they break him? Would they study his every move? Or, as the fear crept in, would they eventually turn him into some kind of weapon? His thoughts were interrupted by the soft hiss of the door opening. A figure stepped into the room. At first, Derek thought it was another Zyrixian warrior. Tall, intimidating, with sharp, angular features, and a deadly weapon at their side. But this one was different. She was young, barely older than Derek himself. Her armor gleamed with a dark, metallic sheen, and her eyes, the color of molten lava, seemed to flicker with a strange mix of curiosity and caution. She didn't have the same cold, calculating gaze that the others had. No, there was something else in her expression, a hesitation, as if she didn't quite know what to expect from the human in front of her. Derek stood slowly, his muscles stiff from the hours of confinement. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, and instinctively, he straightened. He knew that if he showed any sign of weakness, it could be the end. But he also knew that he couldn't go on like this forever. If he didn't find a way out of this situation, if he didn't make some kind of connection with them, he might never see his home again. The girl, no. The warrior took a step closer. She raised a hand, as if to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She hesitated. Derek watched her closely, his heart pounding. This was his chance. He could try to talk to her, to figure out what they wanted. Maybe she was different from the others. "Hey," Derek said, his voice hoarse from lack of use. "What's going on here? Why am I here?" The woman blinked at him, her eyes wide with confusion. She seemed to understand the words, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took another step forward, cautiously. Derek's eyes followed her movements. She was fast, too fast for someone so unsure. His mind raced. What did she want? Why was she here? Was she going to hurt him? The silence between them stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Derek opened his mouth again. But before he could speak, she suddenly flinched, stepping back as if he had lunged at her. She looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "Human," she muttered, her voice shaky. "Why is it so hard?" Derek furrowed his brow. Her words didn't make sense. What did she mean? Was she scared of him? Or was it something else? He took a cautious step forward, trying not to make any sudden moves. "I don't know what you mean," Derek said gently, trying to keep his voice calm. "I just want to understand. Why am I here? What do you want from me?" The Zyrixian woman looked at him again, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. It was clear she didn't know how to respond. For a moment, Derek thought she might run away. But instead, she stayed where she was. The tension in the room hung heavy, thick as smoke. The woman hesitated, glancing at the door behind her. It is. She paused, searching for the right words, then simply shook her head. You're different. Derek's heart skipped a beat. Different? He wasn't sure if it was a good thing or a bad thing. But before he could ask what she meant, she took another step back, visibly shaken. There's something wrong. I don't understand. It's pressing against me, she said in a voice barely above a whisper. The words were confusing, tangled, and Derek couldn't make sense of them. But it was clear that whatever was happening was deeply unsettling for her. Derek glanced at her, trying to understand. She was clearly not like the other Zyrixians. Her reaction to him was so different, so human in its complexity. It wasn't the cold, detached fear he had seen in the others. No. There was something more personal about it. And that scared Derek more than anything. Her gaze shifted to the floor, as though she couldn't look him in the eye anymore. I've never... Her voice trailed off, and Derek could see the confusion and fear in her face. She wasn't just frightened of him. She was frightened by something she couldn't quite explain. Something deep inside her. Derek felt a pang of sympathy for her, something he hadn't expected. The Zyrixians were supposed to be ruthless. They were supposed to be a force of nature, unyielding and unstoppable. But this woman, this warrior, she was different. She was frightened, vulnerable, confused. He didn't know what was happening, but in that moment, Derek realized that he wasn't the only one trapped here. Hey, Derek said softly, trying to break the tension. The woman's eyes flickered to him again, uncertainty written all over her face. Her lips parted as though she wanted to say something, but she couldn't find the words. She seemed to be struggling with herself, torn between instinct and something else. Something deeper, more complicated. I can't, she whispered, as if speaking to herself. You're different. And then, in a quiet voice that was barely audible, she added, You're nothing like they said. The silence in the room stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Derek stood there, his mind racing. The Zyrixian woman, he still didn't know her name, was clearly struggling with something, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Her fear was so intense that it almost seemed to fill the room. But it was different from the fear he'd seen in the other Zyrixians. She wasn't just afraid of him. She was afraid of something else, something that he couldn't see. I'm not going to hurt you, Derek repeated, trying to steady his voice. He had to break through whatever wall was standing between them, whatever misunderstanding was causing this fear. But her reaction only deepened the mystery. She turned away from him, pacing in a tight circle, her fingers brushing the edges of the cell. You don't understand. I've been trained. I've been told so much about your kind, your reputation. But... She shook her head, her words trailing off. You're not what I expected. Derek took a step forward, carefully keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. He didn't want to push her further away, but he couldn't stand this distance between them. He wanted to understand what was going on, what was causing her this fear. What was it that made her feel so trapped in this situation? You were told we're monsters? Derek asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. The Zyrixian woman stopped pacing. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes flickering with a mix of confusion and suspicion. Monsters? She repeated, almost as if tasting the word. No. But, she hesitated again, clearly struggling with her thoughts. You're different. Terrifying. The stories said humans are violent, that you fight without reason, without mercy. Derek nodded slowly. He'd heard these kinds of stories before. Every alien species he'd encountered had their own version of the human legend. A tale of fierce warriors who never gave up, who fought with a savagery no one could understand. The reputation of humanity had spread throughout the stars, but not always for the right reasons. Still, he had hoped that the truth would be different, that perhaps these creatures could see beyond the myth. "I know the stories," Derek said quietly, his voice tinged with a hint of bitterness. "But we're not all like that. I'm not like that. You think we don't have mercy? You think we only kill for sport? That's not true. I'm here because I was taken, just like you are." He gestured to her, his eyes softening with empathy. "I'm just trying to survive." "One. Not problem." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, they stood in silence. The only sound, the faint hum of the ship's engines. Derek could feel the weight of her gaze on him. But it wasn't the cold, calculating gaze of the other Zyrixians. This was different. There was something human in her uncertainty, something vulnerable in the way she seemed to process his words. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you're so hard." She flinched, as if even saying the word was painful. "I've never felt anything like it before. I can't." Her words faltered, and she took a step back, almost as if she was retreating from him. "I don't understand." Derek frowned, trying to make sense of her reaction. "What do you mean?" he asked, his confusion growing. "What's hard? What are you talking about?" The Zyrixian woman shifted uneasily, her body tense as if preparing for something she couldn't control. "It's pressing against me," she said, her voice trembling now. "I've never been this close to a human before. The stories said it would be worse." Derek's heart skipped a beat. It suddenly dawned on him what she was referring to. "It's pressing against me." She wasn't talking about an attack. She wasn't talking about violence. She was talking about her own physical reaction to being so close to him. It was clear now that her fear wasn't just about him, it was about her own response to him. "I'm sorry," Derek said quickly, stepping back. "I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. I won't come any closer, I promise." But the woman shook her head, clearly lost in her own thoughts. "I don't know why it feels this way," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "It's like your presence is pressing in on me. I've been taught to fear you, to stay away. But now, I can't even move. I don't understand why it's so hard." Derek looked at her, his mind racing. Was this a cultural thing? A biological reaction to proximity? Or was it something else entirely? He had no idea. All he knew was that he couldn't stand to see her so afraid, so trapped in her own confusion. "I didn't mean to make you feel this way," he said again, his tone soft. "I'm not like the stories. I just want to get out of here. I don't want to hurt anyone." She looked at him, her gaze softer now, though still filled with uncertainty. "But you could." Almost as if it was an afterthought. "You're human. You're capable of great violence. I've been trained to fear it." Derek swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. He had no idea how to convince her that he wasn't like the others, that he wasn't a monster, that he wasn't here to destroy her or anyone else. All he wanted was to survive, to find a way to escape this nightmare. "I know what you've been taught," he said quietly. "But not everything is as it seems. I don't want to fight you. I just want to understand. I want to get out of here. Together." Her eyes flickered with something new, hope, or perhaps it was just curiosity. Either way, Derek could feel the slightest shift in her demeanor. She wasn't as afraid of him anymore. But the walls inside her mind were still firmly in place. "I can't promise I won't fear you," she said softly, the words carrying a weight of resignation. "But I can try. I can try to understand." Derek nodded, relief flooding him. At least she was open to trying. At least there was a possibility, however small, that they could move past this misunderstanding. "Thank you," he said. "That's all I can ask for." For a moment, they stood in silence, each processing the gravity of what had just transpired. Derek had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time since his capture, he felt like there was hope. The wall between them wasn't impenetrable after all. Maybe it would take time, but they might just be able to bridge the gap between their two worlds. The Xerixian woman took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "I'm Vera," she said finally, her voice still shaky but softer now. "I'm not like the others." "Crease." Derek gave a small smile, the tension in his body slowly easing. "I'm Derek. And I'm not like the others, either." The ship's corridors were eerily quiet, as Derek and Vera stood in the small, sterile room. The tension between them had eased slightly, but it still lingered in the air like a thick fog. They both knew things weren't as simple as they seemed, but they couldn't ignore the fact that something had shifted between them. They weren't enemies. Not exactly, but they were still strangers, both trying to figure out how to navigate this strange, dangerous situation. Derek looked at Vera, the young Xerixian warrior who was, in many ways, just as trapped as he was. He couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for her. She was caught between the stories she had been taught about humans and the reality of what she was seeing in front of her. Her fear had been raw and real, but now there was something else in her eyes, something that he couldn't quite define. It was a mixture of curiosity and confusion. A desire to understand what she had always been taught to fear. "I'm still not sure what to think," Vera said, her voice soft and hesitant. "The stories said humans were savage, but you're nothing like that." Derek rubbed the back of his neck, trying to think of how to explain himself. "I know what you've been told. I know the stories about humanity, about how we're supposed to be ruthless and violent. But that's not all we are. There's a lot more to us than that." Vera nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving him. I don't understand. If you're not like the stories, then what are you like?" Derek paused. It wasn't easy to explain. He wasn't just some soldier or warrior. He wasn't a simple figure to be understood in a few sentences. But he had to try. He had to break through the walls that were still up between them, even if it meant being vulnerable. "I'm just a person," he said quietly. "I've fought. Yes, I've been in battles. But that doesn't define me. I don't fight just because I can. I fight because I have to protect the people I care about, to protect myself. But that doesn't mean I enjoy it. I don't like violence. I don't like hurting others." Vera's brow furrowed as she processed his words. It was clear that she didn't fully understand, but she was trying. "But your species, humans, are known for being warriors. You've conquered planets. You've fought battles that other species couldn't even dream of winning." Derek sighed. "Yeah, that's true. But just because we're good at fighting doesn't mean it's what we want. We don't always have a choice." He didn't know if Vera understood what he meant, but at least she was listening. That was a start. There was a long pause as Vera stared at the floor, her mind clearly racing. She was quiet for a while, and Derek wondered what she was thinking. Was she still afraid? Did she still see him as a threat? Or was she starting to see him as something different? Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I've been trained my whole life to fear humans, to fear what you might do. And when I first saw you, I thought I was going to have to fight for my life. But now..." She hesitated, looking up at him with a mixture of uncertainty and something else. Something like hope. "But now, I'm not sure anymore." Derek smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. "I'm glad you're starting to see that. I don't want to be your enemy, Vera. I don't want to fight you. I just want to find a way out of this." For a moment, it seemed like she was going to say something else. But she stopped herself, her lips pressing together. There was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, a silent battle between what she had been taught and what she was beginning to believe. "I don't know what to do," Vera whispered, almost to herself. "Everything I've been told says you're a danger, but you're not acting like one. You're not like the others. Derek could feel the weight of her words. It wasn't just her fear of him that had caused the tension. It was everything she had been taught. Everything she had grown up believing about humans. And now, everything she was seeing in him was contradicting those beliefs. It was a lot to process, especially for someone who had been trained from birth to fear the unknown. I understand that it's hard to see things differently, Derek said, his voice gentle. I can't change what you've been taught. But I can show you who I am. I can prove that not all humans are like the stories. Vera nodded, her gaze meeting his for the first time without fear. Derek felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. At least now, they were speaking the same language, both literally and figuratively. They weren't enemies anymore, not in the way she had once believed, but there was still a long way to go. Thank you, he said softly. That's all I can ask for. For the next few hours, they continued to talk. It wasn't easy, there were still gaps in their understanding, still walls that hadn't quite come down. But with each conversation, with each passing moment, the tension between them slowly started to melt away. Vera began to share more about her people, their culture, their history, and their beliefs. She spoke of the strict training she had undergone, the battles she had been prepared for, the expectations placed on her as a Zyrixian warrior. Derek listened intently, trying to understand her perspective, trying to see the world through her eyes. And in return, he shared his own experiences, what it was like growing up on Earth, what it was like to fight for survival in a world that seemed determined to destroy him. They didn't agree on everything, but they didn't need to. What mattered was that they were finally listening to each other. They were starting to see each other as more than just enemies, more than just strangers. They were seeing each other as people. As the hours passed, Derek could feel the change in the air. The fear had almost completely vanished from Vera's eyes. In its place, there was something else. Something he hadn't expected. Trust. It was small, fragile, and still untested. But it was there. And it was enough. Derek stood up and stretched his arms, the stiffness in his muscles reminding him that he hadn't moved much in days. Do you think they'll keep us here forever? He asked, glancing at the door of the cell. Vera didn't immediately answer. She stood up as well, her eyes scanning the room, as if looking for an answer she wasn't sure existed. I don't know, she said finally, but I don't think it will be forever. The Zyrixians may be many things, but they're not unreasonable, and we're both valuable, in our own ways. Derek nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what she meant. But for the first time since his capture, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this after all. Maybe there was a chance for them both to survive this strange situation. I guess we'll find out, he said with a small smile. Vera glanced at him, her lips curving into a faint smile of her own. Yes, we will. The ship felt even quieter than usual as the days dragged on. Derek had lost track of time. He wasn't sure how long he had been locked in this cold, sterile cell, separated from his crew and his home. The only thing that kept him going was the small, fragile connection he had started to build with Vera. It was strange. Really, just a few days ago, he had seen her as nothing more than an enemy, a member of a powerful alien species who had captured him, a soldier of Earth. But now, as he sat across from her in the dimly lit room, he realized how much had changed. Vera was no longer just a warrior. She wasn't the cold, unfeeling soldier he had first imagined. She was someone who had been trained to fear and destroy humans. But over time, she had started to see Derek as more than a threat. She had seen him as a person, and now they were allies. I don't know how much longer I can stand this, Vera said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. She was pacing in a slow circle, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her usual poise had been replaced by frustration. We've been here for days, Derek. And I'm not sure what they want from us anymore. Derek looked up at her, his gaze steady. I don't know either. But we've survived this long. We're not alone. We're in this together. Right? Vera stopped pacing and turned to face him, her expression softening. She nodded slowly. Right. Together. They had reached a kind of understanding over the past few days. They had shared stories, small, personal details about their lives, their homes, their cultures. Vera had learned more about Earth, about the people Derek had fought for. In return, Derek had learned about the Zyrixians, about their warrior traditions, their commitment to honor, and their rigid society. But the one thing they had learned most of all was that neither of them had much control over their situation. The Zyrixians were powerful, and Derek's chances of escaping the ship had seemed slim from the start. But there was something else at play here, a deeper connection that neither of them had anticipated. Derek could see the way Vera's eyes had changed over time. The fear was still there, buried beneath layers of doubt and uncertainty. But there was something else there now, something he hadn't expected. Respect, and maybe, just maybe, a kind of trust. He stood up from his seat, stretching his stiff limbs. You know, I think it's time we start thinking about a way out of here. I can't stand being stuck in this cell forever. Vera looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. And how do you suggest we do that? Well, hoded closed, hoded closed. Derek grinned, the first real smile he'd had in days. Well, I've been paying attention. I think I've figured out a way to get us out. For a moment, Vera just stared at him, skeptical. Then, her gaze softened. You're serious? Dead serious, Derek said, his voice confident. I've been watching the guards. I know their patterns, their shifts. I'm starting to think we could slip past them. Vera's eyes flickered with something. Hope? And you think we can escape? I think we can, Derek said. But it's going to take teamwork. We need to move quickly, and we need to be quiet. But if we stick together, we have a shot. Vera considered his words for a long moment, her brow furrowing as she weighed the risks. I don't know, Derek. If they catch us, we'll never get another chance. The Zyrixians don't forgive mistakes. Derek's smile faded slightly, but he didn't back down. I'm not asking you to take a blind leap of faith, but I think this is our best shot. There was another long pause. Derek could see the struggle in Vera's eyes. The warrior within her, trained for battle and survival, was at odds with the part of her that was beginning to question everything she had been taught, everything she had believed. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but firm. I'm with you. I'll trust you. Derek felt a rush of gratitude. In that moment, he realized just how far they had come. From enemy to allies, from strangers to companions. They hadn't just survived the last few days, they had learned to trust each other. And that trust, however fragile, was more powerful than any weapon. The plan was simple. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only chance they had. The Zyrixians weren't stupid, and they had kept a close eye on Derek and Vera. But Derek had noticed the small details, the guard shifts, the quiet moments when no one was looking. There were gaps in their security, moments when they could slip by unnoticed. That night, they moved. Vera led the way, her movements silent and fluid, as if she were a shadow slipping through the walls. Derek followed closely behind, his footsteps carefully timed to match hers. They knew the risks, they had to move quickly, or they wouldn't have another chance. The ship's hallways were a maze of metallic walls, sharp corners, and blinking lights. Every sound echoed louder than it should have. Every shadow seemed to hold danger, but they moved together, working as one. For the first time, Derek felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. They reached the first checkpoint without incident, slipping past a pair of guards who were too engrossed in their conversation to notice them. Vera gave Derek a quick nod of approval, and they continued on. But their luck didn't last. As they turned a corner, Derek's heart skipped a beat. A group of Xerixians appeared in the hallway, their eyes scanning the area. Derek and Vera froze, their backs pressed against the wall. The guards didn't seem to have noticed them yet, but it was only a matter of time before they did. Derek's mind raced. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, his breath coming faster. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. They could make a run for it. But there was a good chance they would be caught. Or worse. Vera turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. But there was something else there. Determination. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to hide. She was ready to fight. Derek took a deep breath, his hand moving to the small weapon he had hidden on his belt. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to get them out of this. We make a run for it on my signal, Derek whispered. Vera nodded, her jaw set in determination. The guards were getting closer. Derek's grip tightened on his weapon. Now, he hissed. Without hesitation, they sprinted down the hallway, moving as fast as they could. The guards shouted in surprise, but it was too late. Derek and Vera had already turned a corner and were out of sight. They ran through the ship's maze, their footsteps echoing in the narrow halls. Derek could hear the guards behind them, but he didn't dare look back. They were close, but they weren't close enough. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, they were outside. The cold, open space of the ship's exterior stretched before them, and Derek could see the stars in the distance. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a step in the right direction. They were out of the ship's hold, and now, they just had to figure out how to get home. Vera turned to him, her eyes filled with something that Derek hadn't seen in her before: hope. We did it, she said, her voice breathless, but triumphant. Derek grinned. Yeah, we did. And for the first time since his capture, Derek allowed himself to believe that they might just make it out of this alive.